How's it going, YouTube? Coming to you today with another video, and today, guys, what to bring to you is the podcast episode with Shadowrabbit, Sir Emanon, and Bearxbear. This is such a fun time to really be able to bring on different perspectives onto the channel with different content creators, because everyone gets into the game at different times and everyone has different perspectives in the game because of the way that they have interpreted it in the different decks that they've been playing. So I really do like having these episodes to really get the clashing or really interesting insights, because it's something that, especially with a newer format, and a lot of people are really afraid of what could happen as far as like a tier 0 format, which I don't really think is going to happen because of the fact that we don't even have max C over here, so you can't even essentially like quote unquote search it. So I think that's really important to note here. But at the same point, I do think that the newer decks are going to be really impactful to the game, but I just really don't know how they're going to interact with decks like Dragon and Sword Soul. So we're here with some friends today to really be able to figure that one out.
Hi, I'm Naya, aka Shadowrabbitygo on YouTube. I do competitive content focused on, tier lists, like best decks, tech cards, any kind of ideas I can get to you guys. I love bringing them to you. There's budget options, all of that on my channel, and also like an occasional 3-hour GX character tier list if that's what you're interested in, but that's out of the ordinary, so mostly competitive stuff.
Hey, what's up, guys? Sir Emanon here. I kind of dip in and out of the format and in and out of content creation based on my interest in the game. But when I do make content creation, I typically focus on very specific and detailed micro interactions between decks or cards, things of that nature. So usually I will end up kind of focusing on one deck that I'm interested in, things like Tri-Brigade Loyalist in the past or Lunolite way back in the day, and then kind of centralize around that, focusing on very specific guides on how to play those decks, as well as accompanying gameplay, focus on things that maybe I did well or things that I can improve on, and hopefully you guys at home could maybe learn a thing or two from it.
Hey guys, my name is Bear. I make all sorts of Yu-Gi-Oh content, competitive, fun. A lot of people know me for my thumbnails. I play a lot of Unchained, but nobody's ever going to recognize me for that. Thanks a lot, Distant Coder.
Hey, thank you all for joining me today, and I really do love Yu-Gi-Oh from a very core level, and it's something that I love discussing. It's a really fun game to play, and so especially with the biggest and the hottest topic really right now is what is going to be the better deck, and that's going to be either Sprite or Terralment, and then everyone that's coping on Exorcist or actually being a good deck. But at the same time, I really do want to know what your opinions are, the newer decks coming out right now, because I personally am really leaning toward Terralment. I think that deck's gonna be really strong, but what do you guys think?
I agree. Like, looking at Sprite is like, over there it's very popular due to like being able to search max C and stuff like that. And I think over here decks like Terralment, like just fusion focused stuff is like way more prevalent. And yeah, I just think Splite is like, it's awesome, yeah, I like did test hands, so I was like, wow, that's busted. But then looking at something that's also highly just consistent like Terralment, I think it's also way better, because when you have a strategy that's like Splite very much reliant on the normal summon, things like that, if you don't have that max C that like backs you up and keeps you going, the deck just doesn't feel that great anymore.
Yeah, so for me personally, I have only recently acquainted myself with these cards, so I have a very kind of preliminary understanding of it, so I maybe don't have the most informed opinion here, but from what I can tell, I think Sprite, one of its greatest strengths actually is in its simplicity. Like, it does a lot of what its game plan very, very well, just because a lot of the cards accomplish very similar goals. You have very easy access to the boss monsters and like your endgame disruptions. Terralment, on the other hand, I think its strength potentially, especially in the TCG where a lot of people like to innovate, is the ability for it to kind of like flex into very many different builds. You have like Shadal variants, you have branded variants, you have a lot of different potential routes you can go down, which is appealing to me personally because I like being able to kind of explore and adapt based on what the metagame has to offer. So I think that is something that is a big strength of the deck that maybe Sprite can't necessarily offer. But in the same vein, if the meta does become very focused upon like those two decks that a lot of people are kind of posturing for, Sprite could be very, very solid as just a kind of like backbone strategy to refer to at any given point.
Well, I'm going to say both Emanon. I think in the last maybe 24 hours is when I started looking into Power the Elements format. I actually watched Shadow's video about the counters to Splite, and yeah. So like, while I know both the decks, they're gonna be insane. I think they're both gonna be tier 1 decks. I don't think necessarily they're gonna, or like, I don't think the TCG is gonna mirror the OCG in the sense where they're gonna completely dominate. I think we have a large variety of decks, and I think one of the things that really caught my eye is our format even right now is so much different from the OCG, because OCG, they never had like Predaplant Despia, And then Pack's recent like Nats deck, the one with all the punk stuff and the Gizmac, I thought that was really sick. And he was playing I think it was Eradicator. I don't know, there's too many virus cards, but I think it was Eradicator. And then I know in Shadow's video she covered Deck Devastation Virus, which I think is really cool. And I think maybe there's a lot of innovation that's still out there that maybe can come into the format. So I don't know, we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, I take a really wide look at the OCG and what their lists are looking like and how they're really countering the meta. And so I've even seen a lot of tier limit decks that are playing the Codebreaker link too, because it's 2300 and you can hit it with a deck devi. And then if your opponent doesn't have a field spell, they're using the Dark Beckoning Beast, because you can get a double normal summon into the Codebreaker and it's 23, so it can swing over Winda. So there's
swing over Maguska as well. That's
over that too, yeah. And that's really cool as well, because there's just so many different cards you really have to be concerned about in the game right now. And that's something where there are going to be so many different innovative counters. And that's why I really love the TCG. And that's because of the fact that we do just take decks and we just break them, because it's what we do. And so when it comes to tier limit, I see that just having such a bigger ceiling right now. As far, maybe not as far as like Prank Kid ceiling, but it's pretty close in my opinion.
I think mostly what difference is maxi. Like, let's just be real. You know, over here we can actually afford to like explore things with Punk and engines that are like very much focused on special summoning. And I think the tier limit Punk version is like incredibly strong. And over there they just cannot afford to even explore those types of things. So over their decks like need to be very much just reliant on a couple simple things, like Sir Emanon said. And like if you even compare like a random deck like Phantom Knights, like over there it just did incredibly well when it had adventure stuff, Phantom Knight stuff, and like hand traps. And over here we have many more things to do, and it's not even like going off, and the deck is not even good. So I think the difference is huge between TCG and OCG.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when it comes to like the direction of Yu-Gi-Oh too, and we're seeing like a lot of these newer decks, and we're even talking about now like, wow, it has so much potential and this deck is so good, that means the decks that we currently have are either going to get toned down by the ban list, or we already feel like these newer decks might be even better than the older decks. So that leans into a lot more of a conversation about power creep. And so we did just get a brand new card, the Ultimate Slay, and that card is essentially just being able to shuffle back a monster on the board if you send the same type of it from the extract to the graveyard. Your opponent cannot respond with monster effects. So we're definitely getting a lot stronger cards. Do you think that's healthy for the game, or do you think that it's fine that we keep getting more broken cards?
I think it's necessary evil. It's not necessarily healthy, it's just what needs to happen for the game to actually progress, you know, in some kind of way, because they're sort of like, they back themselves in a corner where it's like they need to print cards that say you cannot respond, because that's like the only thing left for them to do. I don't know, I mean, those kinds of cards are like, they're nice just because boards are becoming that much stronger, so you need to have a way to actually break them. And when you have a card like that, that's actually not once per turn, like hard once per turn, and you can send stuff like the Evil Twin Link or like Antis or like whatever you want, you actually get even more pluses. I think it's necessary for you to be able to even compete against a very dominant deck. So
yeah, I think the power creep is a very interesting discussion point. I think I agree with what Shadow Rabbit says in terms of it being a necessary evil, just because of the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't have rotation in any capacity. So in order for, you know, cards to kind of keep progressing and to like sell product, essentially, you do really need to have some sort of, I guess, you know, like metric of strength, and you need cards to kind of like raise the bar continuously. So I think in terms of the competitive landscape, I think players are always very good at adapting around that. And something I wish Konami did more often, that hopefully we'll see in the future, is make cards that have like varying degrees of like power in terms of like what they do essentially. So a card like the Sword Soul Synchro, Qixing Longyan, I think that's a great example of a card that is different than just like your standard like Omni Negate sort of thing, where it's very powerful, but it has a lot of wide varieties in terms of its applications against things like the Adventure package that make it very unique and stand out. So I think that's maybe one way to kind of like, not necessarily circumvent power creep, but to kind of work with it. But I guess another dimension to talk about with power creep though is what it facilitates in terms of like a power gap between the best decks and like the rogue decks. And this hurts especially with like newer and returning players who are trying to like get back into the game, or maybe want to play like, you know, a more rogue strategy. It's a lot harder to compete with, you know, the new cards that Konami continuously pushes out because those cards are just so much stronger than the existing strategies out there. So I think that also kind of presents itself an issue, but that one I don't really know if there's a great solution to, just given the nature of the game as it is recently.
For me, I think power creep's an interesting discussion because I feel like we're kind of getting close to the ceiling of how much like you can actually power creep a card. Because with art like Ultimate Slayer, Artemis Slayer, whatever, I don't know what it's called, but like the fact that you can't respond, it didn't catch people like by that much surprise because we have cards like Dark Ruler that already exist. And the thing is, I remember I think it was a couple formats ago, but every side deck looked the same and I hated it. Like literally card for card, every side deck was the same. And I kind of like that they're introducing all these like generic staple cards that are so versatile that you can put in so many decks. And I feel like it's kind of healthy for the game because now we're gonna see more variety in side decks. Like we're gonna see like the virus cards, we're gonna be seeing Slayer, we're gonna be seeing Dark Ruler, we're gonna be seeing a variety of hand traps. So like personally, I kind of like the power creep where it is right now. I don't think it's to the point anymore where it's as obnoxious as it used to be.
I think that as long as we have a best deck, there's never going to be a stop to power creep because you don't necessarily have to print the most broken card in the game. You just have to print something that counters the best deck. So like at that point, it can just be on forever. And that's something that I feel like a lot of people there are like, well, at some point you're going to get to a point where you just can't power creep anything. And I'm like, I think that as long as that situation still applies to the game, I don't think that we'll ever see an end to it personally.
I think it's also interesting to look at the fact that they are sort of doing a good thing when it comes to printing a couple decks that can actually perform even years later. If you look at Sky Striker and Salamangreat and stuff like that, I think it's incredible that they actually made Salamangreat as accessible as it was, and right now someone can like or could pick it up and like win Nats with it. So I think even though power creep is a very obvious thing in the game, I think they're still taking that into account when it comes to actually printing strategies that can, you know, you can actually play for a couple years. So even if power creep is happening, you can still like dust off the Sky Striker deck and like play it again in 3 years. Or like I think a deck like Sword So that like just feels very strong and very fair. If they don't completely nuke it, it's still going to be great in like, I don't know, a year's time. So I think they're sort of taking that into account when it comes to building and making actual decks.
So let me ask you a follow-up question then. Is it a good thing that we see certain decks that were already very oppressive coming back for round 2? I.e. when Spiral came back and now Dark Worlds are coming back?
I think, yeah. Like, because they can, like, they made the game. They can print any deck they want. So at any point in time, like, they can just introduce new splites or new tier limit or something. But it's still nice to see because of the nostalgia value. Like, I think, and with the, like, Blackwing support or something, like, there are so many people saying, like, oh my god, I'm so super hyped for Blackwing. Like, I love that deck, you know, I just want the support, similar to, like, Dark World. So I think it's a good thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I personally am kind of indifferent. I think that as it's all based on context, right? So, like, you kind of brought up the example of Spiral, for instance. I think Spiral in 2017 looked pretty different from Spiral like at the beginning of 2020, just because like the formats shifted and like the power level overall is different. So if you know the decks are adjusted to kind of accommodate for the newer format, I think it's overall fine. I just think in general, you know, players, I think a lot of people will be able to just like pick up a deck, and if they really identify with a strategy and they really enjoy playing it, it's a good thing to be able to play that deck and revisit that strategy, you know, a couple years or so down the line. You know, there's a lot of dedicated like BA players, striker players, etc., who will, you know, keep flocking back to their deck, and I don't think there's anything really wrong with being able to, you know, always have kind of like a comfort strategy, if you will.
Yeah, I think I agree. And for me, it's not even just like the decks or the archetypes. I think Thunder Dragon was really cool because Thunder Dragon, like itself, the card was printed so long ago, and I think some people do have some nostalgia value to that. So the fact that you were able to make an entire strategy around that was really cool. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have any other opinion. Like both of them just basically said what I was thinking.
Yeah, I was looking more toward like, even if we looked at today, right, and then we got like new Goki support, I feel like people would be very hesitant as to how good that could get, right, because of what it already did to the format back when. So it's really interesting to see like a lot of these really broken archetypes starting to get support again, because I remember back when it was Dark World, like FTK, like loop your opponent's hand, or like danger loops, you know, it was just a whole nother thing. And the fact that we're getting all these new cards and they're really good for Dark World, it just is crazy to me, because like all the cards that we like now have and cards that we didn't have before. So it should be quite the interesting format when we start getting those as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
I think as long as like the strategy it facilitates isn't like inherently unfair. Like you bring up the example of an FTK, which obviously is, I would like to think most of us would agree it's not healthy for the game in a vacuum. But if they can like redesign or kind of reimagine the Dark World strategy to kind of like play with its own sort of archetype and like focus on like its centralized theme of like discarding cards and getting value rather than like using infinite grapple loops with Firewall to like win on the first turn, I think that's like, I think that's a better way to sort of like reintroduce a strategy into the meta.
You know, it's hilarious you just said Firewall, because the new Morphtronic that can FTK with Firewall.
I actually, I saw some people mentioning that the new Morphtronic is going to be in the new set, which I actually did not realize that facilitated an FTK. So
yeah, I saw that today. I saw talked about an FTK, and I was just like, you know, sweating.
Yeah, so essentially you normal summon the Telephon, and the Telephon can roll a die and special one back in the grave. So if you have another Telephon in the grave, they continuously loop each other because it's not its return. And then you just link up into a Firewall, and you dump Cannon Soldier with Curious, and then you start Yugioh out to the board, and then you keep looping the two, and you keep popping with Cannon Soldier.
Oh, that sounds like so much fun.
Yeah, so
Yugioh.
it's crazy. Firewall, it's errated, it's healthy. It's probably not gonna be that relevant, but still, it's crazy. That's a thing again. On to our next topic, though, a rather fun one. What was your favorite format?
Well, I obviously love toss format. It's like when someone asks that, like the answer is more than likely going to be that. Like I enjoy that format so much, and I played Orcust, like the healthy Orcust, you know, with nightmare stuff, and that was really nice. I mean, no, it wasn't like the fact that a couple things were a bit too unhealthy, I think started to show itself in 2020, like when the second Sky Striker stuff got mashed up with Orcust, I think is the point in time when we were just like done with it. But before that, I was a huge fan of the format. I think it's incredible when decks are almost on the same power level. You can be prepared for them, you know what to side, you know your matchups, and it's also the fact that decks were relatively accessible and they've been played for like some time, so they could be explored on and off, you know, and like I think it's I think those kinds of formats are like the healthiest ones, and I enjoy them the most, I think. And it's also the fact that you know, I played like pretty much every single deck out of the 4, and you can learn something with every deck, and every deck is different from the other. So I think that format by far, you know, I enjoyed the most.
Yeah, so I started playing in like early 2017, so maybe not as much compared to a lot of other players out there, but my answer is actually the same. But for a bit of a different reason. So I played Lunalight pretty much the entirety of 2019. And it was interesting because I think a lot of the matchups from a sort of rogue player's perspective, well, it didn't become as rogue later on into the format, but at the start it definitely was. But kind of preparing for those matchups is definitely pretty interesting because they didn't really have a lot of counter side for you, which made certain matchups very favorable. Like Striker was a very, very good matchup for Lunalight for various different reasons. But yeah, I really enjoy the fact that, you know, kind of like what Shadow Rabbit mentioned, the decks are in known quantity, so you know what to prepare for and how to kind of play against them. And the decks didn't really feel super unfair for the most part. You know, there are definitely exceptions. You know, Striker Orcus is one of them. Also, like the capped like sort of Danger Thunder board at Nats season definitely was like
that was
a
wild,
very strong power player. Yeah. But I did like the ability to kind of like mess around with different decks, kind of like splashing in Orcus to very many different strategies was actually kind of fun. Blue Knight, of course, being one of them. And it has a soft spot in my heart because it was the first event that I got my first YCS top, which was
nice.
Niagara 2019. So yeah, I have a lot of fond memories playing that format. And I definitely hope that Tiger will come back to 3 one day, fingers crossed.
You're going for the run back in Niagara in September?
Oh, hopefully, yeah.
So I'm in the same boat too. Toss format for me too, because
Best format.
yeah, best format by far. So when Dark Saviors came out, that's when I got like really into competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Because like when I was younger, I would get into it, but I didn't really have money or a job, so I couldn't like stay in it. And my friends were like in and out too, so I was never like consistent with it. And then when Striker came out, I'm like, yo, this deck looks sick. And I picked it up and I had a lot of fun with it. I think I played it for like 2 years. And I don't know, I just thought the format was really fun because you got to like really learn the ins and outs of a lot of decks. And it was just fun seeing like a lot of deck specific siding. So I remember like early on when Striker came out, like one really cool tech was Soul Release, which people played for the mirror match, just like banish like the rain and spells and stuff. And then like you got to see a lot of cool interactions, like with Titan being able to make you dodge Call by the Grave, which I thought was really cool. I don't know, I thought the format was just insane. There was a lot of cool interactions. The decks were just really fun. Definitely the best format by far.
Yeah, toss format, the whole definition of that was Chain Titan. Chain
Yeah.
Titan. It was ridiculous. I remember hearing those words in my sleep. It was great though. I love that format. Toss format was by far my favorite. It was a great time. I played Striker. It was so much fun. And it's crazy now when we look at Master Duel and I'm like, one Kagari, like that sucks. Then I have to like think back and I'm like, oh yeah, one Kagari. But it was it was a great time. That format was particularly fun for me, I think, more so because that's when I learned how truly broken a deck could be. Like, not just because like we already had like Goki format and whatnot, but I know that we're already talking about like Striker Orchest. When I saw Striker Draco for my first time, it blew my mind. I was like, that deck's actually wild. Because just going like Area 0 target Heritage and then being able to summon Ray, get instant spell count, it was the craziest thing I've ever seen. 3 diagram, 3 engage. Like, that deck was super cool. And I don't know, I would play that format in a heartbeat. I thought that deck was so much fun. And yeah, I don't know, I could talk about Eternal format for forever, but like, that's why it's called Eternal format.
An eternity.
Yeah.
All right, sorry.
Dude, I forgot who played Striker Draco, like, but the guy that made the video, like in the university or whatever, I watched the whole hour or whatever it was.
Oh, that's
It was actually so good.
Actually,
Yeah, dude, that
I
was
played
so
Thunder
good.
Dragon. I didn't care. I was like, Colossus? No, you're not playing.
There.
See, it was crazy because some people, they would go Colossus pass, and I'd be looking at triple engage, and I'm like, in every world I should win right now, but this Colossus, man, like I can't do anything to it.
Summon Sorceress? Summon Sorceress was wild.
Oh,
I was
yeah.
hitting hand trap like 3 times. I was like, Summon Sorceress? It's all good. I have Titan, I have Colossus. It doesn't matter. You just hand looped yourself. Like, it's good.
See, that deck was funny, though, because if they summon Sorceress and then you Ogre it, they just lost. It was crazy.
Oh, yeah,
that was like the whole combo. if you hit it with Ogre, you just won. And I almost day 2'd that YCS with Guru because it just came out. And I ended up losing to Cosmo in the bubble because I couldn't target any of the ships.
Oh my god.
That sucks.
That is rough.
Guru was dope. My husband was whooping everybody with Guru. Everybody was like, what does that do? Oh my god. They just cried.
It was funny because there was a moment where I activated Cape Flash and I normal summon Guru. And my opponent was like, can I read that? And I was like, yeah. So they read Guru, and I was like, okay, let me read Cave Clash. And I was like, okay. So I like, hand them Cave Clash, and they're like, oh, so this card does nothing. And I'm like, I mean, it's okay. It recurs, it is what it is. And they go, no, it's kind of bad. And I was like, okay. And they like, hand it back to me. I put it back in my spell and trap card zone. I was like, go ahead. And they go, normal summon. And I was like, Guru effect. And like, you can't, you don't control. And they're like, I was like, yes, Cave Clash. So.
I don't know. Cave Clash kind of sucks, though. I always hated Cave Clash.
At the time, I just thought that was the funniest interaction with that card. It's so cool. So, just kind of going into the next question here, because it kind of ties into looking at older formats. What deck do you feel like needs support?
Oh, damn. I always dislike this question because, like, I haven't played for that long to be able to elaborate more. Like, I started playing in 2017, so, like, anything, like, before that, I'm not that familiar with. Let me think for a second. So,
sure.
Like, a random deck that pops into my head is going to be very random. But, like, what about Necros? Like, I know people are such huge fans of Necros, and I always, like, encounter a Necros player, and they just cannot do anything because of, like, power creep and better decks and stuff like that. So that's, like, a random deck that I think people enjoyed a lot. That might get kind of like some support. And since we touched upon like toss format, like I'm totally down for Thunder Dragon having support because without Colossus they cannot do anything. No,
I hate Colossus so much. I never want to see that deck ever again.
If the support involves not having to bring back Colossus, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I think it should stay on the ban list like forever. But like they could get like another boss monster is what I'm saying. Like I've always been sort of down for like something else other than Titan, because if you go through that entire work and then like end on Titan and an Appaloosa, like someone's just gonna laugh at you. Like it's not gonna do anything. So like yeah, Thunder Dragon probably, but it's because it's like my fave deck of all time, so I'm very biased. But yeah, no, don't bring Colossus back though.
Yeah. I don't know either, actually, to be honest. I'm not great in terms of thinking about like legacy support. Obviously, like my biased answer would be Ludolite, but that aside, my actual answer would probably be just more generic Pendulum support. Because I think that Pendulum is really hard to play in the current like competitive climate. Because you can't really devote the space necessary for hand traps or like board breakers main decked. Like just the way the game is nowadays, it's not really feasible to do it. I don't know how to fix this inherent problem, apart from like, I don't know,
Bringing stuff back from the ban list.
Like, it's like a pretty scary prospect to like bring back like every Pendulum piece that's on the ban list. But I don't know. I think like Beyond the Pendulum was kind of like a good sort of like tool to help aid them. I think more things along that line could be helpful. But yeah, I just think like it's really hard to play Pendulum these days. I know Triff would disagree with me on that one, but
I think Adventure does a lot for them. Adventure and Baron do a lot for Pendulum, I think.
Yeah, and I feel like it's more so like Pendulum needs more cards to say one card scales, because it's crazy that they got Monkey Board back and no one's even really playing that card. And I feel like the only real way to make the deck competitive, like in any aspect, is they need Might. Like, Might has to be at 1 for that deck to be doing anything, in my opinion.
Yeah, probably. It's kind of scary to bring back that card, especially if you're bringing back everything else.
Pend is a slippery slope.
On that level. Yeah, it's necessary to have cards on that level if you want Pendulum to be good. But I guess Konami just doesn't want Pendulum to be good.
I'd be down for Pen support if they put less text in the cards. Because I don't want to read those cards, dude. They're so long.
I feel like when it comes to Pendulum, though, like, if you give them just a little bit, like, you're on a slippery slope to a tier 0 format. Like,
for sure.
Pendulum is scary, and that's very apparent that Konami realizes this by the restrictions that are still on Pendulums. Because when it came out and it was Pepe format, that lasted a weekend. Like, it's kind of wild with how much the deck has not been able to do. And it makes me wonder, like, if they got back even a card like Kieran, like, what would that do to the power of Pendulums, right? So, I don't know. I don't think Kieran should come back because that card's insane. But it's still, like, what do they need to really push them over that edge to say, like, okay, you're competitive now? Like, what can you give them if they can't have a card like Kieran?
Yeah, it's definitely, like, the most polarizing strategy, both in terms of, like, how players are receptive to it. Like, a lot of it's what turns a lot of, like, old school players away from the game overall, but also in terms of just like its power level, like you described. Either it's like insanely overbearing or just completely unplayable, and there's like very little middle ground here.
True.
I think they should work on that though. Like,
yeah,
I'm pretty sure there is like a middle ground, but they just don't really care about fighting it. I think like they could though. I think there's something they could do. But yeah, like you said, it's either it's unplayable or it's like heavily played and way too oppressive. So I think they should find something like in the middle.
Yeah, I remember my buddy told me a story, and he was playing BA back when Kieran was legal, and his friend came up to him, and he was like, "What do we do about Kieran?" And then he put his hand on his shoulder, and he's like, "Friend, we just lose." And it's just like, I just thought that was so funny, because I was just like, yeah, like, it's insane. But like, how do we fix that? I don't know. It's we gotta see what they do.
I think Generator, because I think that deck is thematically so cool, because basically you have this field spell, and then you have this like plethora of boss monster options depending on what deck you're going against, and like you even have like an Omni Negate just to go blind too. Just the problem with that deck is you're running so many bricks, and I feel like if they just gave the field spell like an option to maybe mulligan one of your level 9s or something, that would help a lot. I think the deck is really cool. Like, it used to crutch on VFD a lot, but obviously when Virtual World came out, that card couldn't exist anymore. But yeah, I don't know what else they can do for the deck, but if they could figure something out, I think that'd be sick. Or like maybe even a better normal summon, because a lot of people got excited when Lopter came out, because they're like, oh, well, now you have easier access to Mardell, but honestly, I don't think it really did much for the deck. It's not even a 3-of in my opinion, which kind of unfortunate, but yeah.
Maybe they give him like an Antarctic Baguska for 9s.
Yeah, I think that'd be sick for sure.
I think that'd be really nice. As far as me, I've said this before, I think that the only deck, in my opinion, that really needs support that just hasn't got it yet, and I don't know why, I just love this deck, is just Paleozoic. I think they need a main deck Volcanic Rocket. They need something that can go normal summon, set a Paleo Trap from the deck. Or like some form of a Paleo monster. Like they need some way to play the game, because like right now it's not playable.
Should be really nice.
I like Rocket as a card though, so I think that'd be really cool support for that deck. We're going into a format though with Winda, and that is always going to be one of the biggest ones that are going to be kind of warping the format and really making people think about how they're going to play against certain decks and the popularity of those decks. I feel like Winda is a card that we've seen for a while now, much like Scythe, that we really want to see get banned. Some people are saying that they don't really want to see it get banned, but I think that it's just getting to the point now where maybe it should be. Do we believe that the format is going to be very hand trap heavy, or going to be a lot more equalizers like Droplet and Dark Ruler?
I think equalizers, but I also think that for the most part, like the last couple of formats, things switched up from week to week, so it's very hard to say. But like in theory, if Splight and Tearlament get quite overwhelming, if we compare it to the OCG, they play board breakers, because you cannot like hand trap those decks, because it's very, very weird. So I think the builds with, like, if you look at Splight builds with Judgment and Dark Ruler, I think builds like that are really nice, and I think they make a lot of sense. And right now I think it's also quite feasible to like put 3 Dark Ruler in and you don't really hurt your consistency. Like I think it's still okay. So I'm on the side of board breakers, because they are going to cover more matchups than hand traps would. But still, if you have a couple slots, like if you play a playset of Ash, I don't think you can really hurt your deck. You're still going to like encounter a Despia or something, and it's also really much dependent on the fact that we still have a lot of decks like present without a ban list. You know, let's say there's no ban list. You know, we have a couple decks that we need to take care of, and then you need those Ashes, and you need even Ghost Ogre like for adventure stuff. So I think it's going to be switching up from week to week, but it really heavily depends on how Tearlament and Splight are actually going to be played, how much they're going to be played, I should say. So yeah.
Yeah. So again, my knowledge on like kind of like the upcoming format is a little bit limited here, but every time I think that equalizers are going to be good, I always like test them, and I just realize a lot of the times hand traps generally work better. So I usually am just team hand traps, because I think that like they flex really well across many different matchups. Like they work well going first and going second. I think one thing though that might differ with this format in particular though is kind of like the presence of being able to like turn 3 Dark Ruler, which, you know, we've seen in the past. A lot of the times the games don't really last that long, but with like a lot of the current Splight setups and like Tearlament setups, you can reasonably like break a board and then they reestablish, and then you can like set up with a Dark Ruler and then like break their board again. Which is something that we hadn't seen a whole lot in the past. Something though to note is like if things continue in the direction of like, you know, first turn auto win buttons, things like Scythe and like the Evil Twin variant of Splight, where like they can just like use the Lilith to like pop it or whatever, like that kind of thing, or just like adventure builds if they're still around, which I presume they will still be around with Scythe and stuff, provided of course they don't get hit. If those things still exist, then hand traps will probably still be very prevalent, but only time will tell. But I'm generally team hand trap.
I think I'm leaning towards equalizers, just because I think Dark Ruler is probably well known to be one of the biggest blow cards against Splight. And I think the fact that Tearlament, sorry, I don't want to say the full name, I feel like I'm going to butcher it. But the fact that Tear can make Winda like on your turn 0, I think that's insane. So even going first, playing Dark Ruler is not that bad. The only thing is, like you mentioned the Morphtronic FTK earlier, it opens up the opportunity for some players to sneak into an event and like do really good with that deck, just because people may not be playing hand traps if they're playing board breakers. The other thing that I don't think was talked about enough after Nats was the fact that the Drytron list in top 32 was playing the turn skip Drytron. So they were setting up the Morph Factor with Thunder of Ruler. And I played against that deck of locals. It's actually my buddy that topped that deck is insane. And if people don't have hand traps for that, you are straight up going to lose.
Yeah, that whole turn skip is actually insane. I've seen it a couple times. I've had it used against me, so it's quite different to play against something like that when you just have equalizers. That's why at the last event, Hartford, my buddy ended up losing to Catapult Turtle FTK, and you know, no hand traps and Despia equals FTK for days. So I think that I'm going to be playing like 20 hand traps in my next list though, so I'm definitely on the side of hand traps instead. I'll be siding equalizers, but I'm definitely going to be main decking hand traps instead. I feel like even Nibiru is going to be really slept on next format, because I feel like a lot of people are really keen on just going, well, we have Gigantic Exploit. Well, that may be true, but that's also just like one deck, and I feel like if people are already very comfortable to say that they're not going to get Nibiru'd, it's the same thing that's going to happen to like the Despia players, because a lot of Despia players were like, no one's setting Nibiru against us, and then they got rocked, and then it's just like, wow, that card's real. So I think that we're going to see a lot of that versus the Spite deck too. I feel like a lot of people are going to get lazy with when they summon Gigantic, and that's just going to be a theme that we see. And so we're going to see like a couple summons and then a rocket dropped, and it's going to decide the game. I very much so agree with Emanon though, that sometimes you just find that games go not past turn 3. And it's really unfortunate, but if you have the blowout, you better have the blowout. If you don't have the blowout, you better have mine, because at that point you're just going to lose the game, and it's kind of insane. That's why I prefer hand traps so much more right now, because I'd rather try to actively stop the problem and not risk running into an FTK versus just having something like Dark Ruler, which I hope stops them, because even now, if you watched at the top even 8 of the event that just happened, the championship, the list of Punk Synchro, my friend Chung, he went and was doing the Scythe Lock in the standby phase. And so that's where even cards like Dark Ruler, if you're main decking it and then you need a droplet, it's kind of not the best. So I think that hand traps are a bit more versatile than playing the equalizers.
I appreciate the fact that you actually wanted to talk about this, because I think it's not talked about enough when it comes to like the fact that you can play whatever you want. Like, the thing that I hate the most is like when a format comes like Splite, and then everybody's like, well, we're not gonna play Nibiru anymore because they're going to play Gigantic Splite. And it's like, so you're not going to like take, I don't know, Nibiru in your main deck to your random locals, and then everybody's just gonna like completely annihilate you because there's gonna be no Splite over there. Like, I hate the fact when people are like, you know, they're sort of generalizing stuff, when in actuality, like, you need to actually build your own deck for your own event. So it's like important to talk about those things, because like you said, you know, a couple henches might be slept on, but they're actually really good if you take it to a very specific event and you know there's like 2 people that are going to be running Splite. So I think that's important to talk about.
Yeah, because even if you go into like a game 2 or 3, you're like, all right, cool, Nibiru wasn't that real in that matchup, but like the rest of the day it was insane. So I feel like that's something where it's kind of crazy to me when people are like, I'm not going to play Rock. And I'm like, that's a mistake, but okay. Like, yeah, so yeah, it's crazy.
I think, so I prepped for Hartford with a couple of buddies, and the entire time they're like, oh, well, nobody's going to be playing hand traps at Hartford because nobody's playing in this format. But I'm like, the whole point of going to like a big event is like, you know that nobody's playing hand traps. So why do you not play hand traps? Like, because people don't expect it. Sword Soul is supposed to be like one of the most represented decks, to the point where they're not even making Baron because they're not scared of Nib anymore. I think it's crazy. And then if you were playing online on Dueling Book, everybody was playing mine. Like, you expected mine at Hartford, but nobody was playing the outs to it. Or like, they just didn't care. They didn't respect it, which is so weird to me.
Yeah, and then they.
That's why it's like really hard to make very sweeping generalizations about like certain cards, because things change on like a weekly basis, or maybe even more frequently than that. Like, you always have to be ahead of the curve. And because of that, like, things are always constantly evolving, and so you have to like change your deck building accordingly, which is very important as like a skill.
So kind of pushing off of that topic now and talking about, you know, what decks we're going to hand trap, what decks we're going to equalize, we also have to think about the fact that there's going to be still other decks in the format, because if we haven't gotten a ban list yet, that means that now we have more decks that are good in the format, which is kind of crazy, because that means that we didn't just have 8 anymore, now we have like 12. So we have to think about some sleeper decks. So my sleeper picks this format, I think that MathMech is going to be better than Exorcister. I think that the Exorcister deck, it has some possibility of doing okay. I prefer MathMech. I think this deck's insane, just as something that you can just take to a local, or something that you can take to like a regional. I think that it has a lot of promise, especially with the fact that they just got Circular. That card pitches for cost, and it's a free summon that searches Superfactorial. And if you know anything about Superfactorial, that card is Revolt, and that is a crazier Revolt in my opinion. But that's just my opinion. What are your sleeper picks for the format?
Oh, I agree. I think MathMech is going to be amazing, and I also think like Exorcister might be fine, but I think people are a bit too hyped on it, because they sort of view the format is going to be tier 0, and then they're going to be able to counter it with Exorcister. But if that doesn't happen, Exorcister itself is still not the greatest deck. So I think moving forward, we're just gonna play like the stuff we have played so far, because there's not going to be a ban list probably in like a month or two. So I think you're still going to be better off just, you know, not getting rid of your Despia deck, or I don't know, Sword Soul deck, or like adventure package, you know, just keep those things, like just play it, because not many things are going to change in my opinion. But yeah, when it comes to sleeper decks, I'm all for Math Mech, honestly.
Yeah, I think it's really cool too, because Math Mech is one of those decks that doesn't require too many monsters on the field at a time to play the game. So if you can get up to Final Sigma and you're under like Mystic Mine, your opponent really can't do a whole lot if they have a full board and then you attack with the Final Sigma. Because at that point it's just like game over almost any monster depending on how you made it. But it's still really crazy to think about too, the fact that so many people are just kind of like, yeah, it's gonna be a deck, but I don't know how great it will be. I'm like, if you can abuse mine in your deck to the point when you can combo under mine, it's kind of insane. So that's why I think that deck's gonna be really good.
Yeah, it was one of those decks that was like missing one card, and now they got it. And I think it's that's really nice to see when a deck just gets that one healthy card, like for the actual archetype to push it forward. I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, that's the Guru clause.
Yeah.
That deck used to be horrible, and then at the time it was really good because of one card. Crazy.
It was amazing.
Yeah, for me, for like sleeper picks, it is pretty interesting. I think moving into the next format, any deck that can facilitate a lot of non-engine will probably be pretty good. Just because, like, I think if we're kind of going off of, you know, what we're saying in terms of like a lot of the decks kind of that are powerful now will continue to be post-pote. That means that there will be like this current very diverse format plus 2 new decks that are also very, very powerful. So the format gets even more diverse, and it's like even more difficult to prepare actively for each deck. And so if you look at a deck like, I'm just kind of going off the top of my head, like Salamangreat, for instance, that like is notorious for having a lot of space for non-engine. I think that you can more readily tailor your deck to just a wide variety of decks based on what you're expecting, whether it's like a smaller locals or like a bigger event. You can kind of like be more adaptable. So I think any deck that kind of operates in that space will probably be pretty good as like a sleeper rogue pick.
I have 2. So for the first one, if Split just happens to end up being tier 0, like if it's actually that good, I think Eldritch is going to be an interesting choice, just because there's a lot of traps that are very good against Split, like specifically against Split. So like Stygian Dirge, Mischief of Gnomes, and I think the other one's called The Band Plays On. I don't know, something like that. Yeah. But I think Mischief is really good. I think it's better than the other 2 just because it's not a continuous. I'm a big fan of chainable traps, because like if they have Storm or something, or Cosmic, like at least you can chain it and it's still going to be applicable for the rest of the turn. Also, the fact that it has the graveyard effect too, so it's like a floodgate for 2 turns, which is really cool. If not, my other sleeper pick would be Agents, because surprisingly, Splight Elf actually helps that deck out a lot, because it gives them another way to play around hand traps, so I think that's really cool too.
That's pretty neat, actually. I didn't think about that. That's pretty neat.
Yeah.
I like that. I like Elf as a card. Like, wow, if there's one card they could have printed this format, like, they printed Elf. And the reason why I like Elf so much is because you get a lot of free value off of it. So, like, you can make Masquerena and then make another card on the board, like, whether it's just any monster, make Elf, bring back Masquerena, and then on the next turn you can use both. And it's just, like, it's such an easy way to get into, like, so many decent cards. Even like an Appaloosa really quick is like so nice just to be able to have that option. Being able to bring back the Masquerena and have the option to go into cards like Underworld Goddess really easily. Like there's just so many different cards that you can go into by ending on such a simplistic board. But like you also don't have to waste many resources to do it when you have cards like Elf in the game. So I really like that a lot. Because even on the follow-up turn, like not only do you bring back IP there, then you bring back another card in the follow-up turn, and it just makes the Underworld Goddess play so free. So I like that a lot. On to the next topic here. And will be our last topic of the day. Do we have a new Imperial Order on our hands? Is Mystic Mine the new order?
I have such specific thoughts on Mystic Mine. So I always get hate for it. I like Mystic Mine. And like, I'm all for Mystic Mine. I despise Mystic Mine Burn. Like, if you're playing Mystic Mine Burn, don't, please. But if you're playing Mine, like, I don't know, I don't dislike the card. I think it's very important because decks are that potent right now. Like, they are so strong. And if they go off and you don't have hand traps, you know, or like any other blowout card, like at the end of the day, Mystic Mine is almost like another copy of Dark Ruler. I know it's not, like, don't come for me, but like it's just a going second card. Like, it's just there's so much hate revolving around Mystic Mine, but it should inherently just be a way for you to be able to break a board. Like, I don't know, if a Dragon Link puts up a board, or like when it used to put up a board of like many negates, you know you'll be able to like trade off with a Savage or something, you know, and it's going to get negated. Like, you're not going to sit on that mine. Like, I hate when someone is like I said, playing Mystic Mine Burn, or like just wants to sit on Mystic Mine. Yeah, that's like lame. But if you take it as a card that's going to boost the strategy, like Sky Striker, for example, or like to be utilized in a deck like Jytron, that's like a bit less powerful than the best decks, I'm all for that. Like, I'm a big fan of it. And I think it's the unhealthy part is probably like the amount of copies we have. And if someone happens to join to like a terraforming and a mine, or like 2 copies, then it's really lame because they just out you with 2 mines. But I think it's a strong card that boosts strategies and shouldn't have that much hate revolving around it. So there's a couple of thoughts I have.
All right, well, I think it's an interesting discussion in terms of like kind of comparing it or equating it to Imperial Order, because I wouldn't really put them on the same plane. I think Order is a card that is like a setup tool that you like set turn 1, and then like you prevent your opponent from actually using their equalizers, things like Dark Ruler, Lightning Storm, etc., because you just flip up Order and then they can't play the game. So I think mine operates very differently in the fact that, you know, it is a go second card. It is like designed to break boards. So like they have very different applications. I think what's interesting about mine as the years have progressed is that because people, I think, have gotten better at playing both with it and around it, it's become a bit more skill testing in terms of the ability to utilize mine to its fullest, because everyone knows that you can't just sit in it for like 20 turns and actually hope for a deck out. Because like that is very optimistic at best when so many decks, like Swordsoul, for instance, have inherent in-engine outs to it. And there's like many more examples than just like that deck. So I think using mine as like a bit of a reprieve is pretty it adds a very interesting dynamic to the game, because like you're on a timer in terms of the person who's using mine. Like you have to end the game in some capacity because your opponent is amassing resources at the same rate that you are for the most part. But I think that the issue kind of comes with the fact that the decks that can accommodate mine in terms of like being able to combo under it, like we were talking about earlier, like you don't usually want to side back or hate for like anything besides the mine, right? Like the only reason you're bringing in Cosmic against like the combo matchups is to deal with mine. I think that is a bit problematic. It's like kind of the same problem with like floodgates in general, like anti-spell and like sword soul and stuff. Like anytime that you have a combo deck abusing like a floodgate that demands back row hate is where things get a little unfair. So I think the discussion of mine can extend to pretty much any floodgate. So I don't really see mine as any more or less problematic than something like, you know, like an anti-spell or like a D-barrier or something like that. So that's kind of like where I stand on that. I'm kind of like in the middle where like I see the issues with it. But I also think that in terms of like its overall function, it's not like it's not as bad as Imperial Order in my personal opinion.
I agree.
I'm in the same boat. I'm in the middle too. I see the benefits of the card. I see why it's obnoxious to play against, but I can also admire where it's come to now as opposed to what it was before. Because before it was just like you're burning your opponent or you're looping Melody Seek with spoofing and you're just killing your opponent after like 20 something turns. But now there's like more strategic play around it, like Emanon mentioned. Sword Soul, like you can bait your opponent with Circle in the end phase, for example, or even if you're playing Sword Soul, you can use mine as a crutch to kind of like go into your Boxia play, spin their whole board, and then you can Boxia pop the mine and just like go for your own plays, which I think is really cool. I don't know where I stand in it. I think I'm indifferent if it gets banned or if it stays in the game, but I don't know. I feel like people also just disrespect floodgates at the moment, which I think is really weird. I feel like Master Duel unironically kind of changed my theory on deck building. I think it's okay to play like a one of if you know you're straight up losing to mine. I don't see the issue with playing like a one of like Cosmic Cyclone or Duster, or if you know you're straight up losing to a floodgate and you see that it's increasing in the format. I don't see why people just don't respect it and just play like the singular copy. Like if you see it, you see it. If you don't, you don't. And if a singular copy of a card turns it into a scenario where you think, oh, my deck's gonna break now just because I'm playing one Cosmic Cyclone. I don't think that's correct. I don't know what you guys think.
So I think that mine, I've had an opinion about mine that a lot of people have not liked for a while as well. I think that the card itself is healthy for the game, and the reason why though is because if we have certain cards in the game that are able to Buster Lock you out of your extra deck, if you're able to Scythe Lock someone out of their extra deck, if you're allowed to put up a 5 negate board, and you look at your opponent with all three of those scenarios, and you're like, do something about it, and then you go Dark Ruler Mine, like, you are going to lose that game regardless looking at that board. And that's also not very interactive whenever they set up a board like that. And especially if people are like, well, you could have hand trapped it. It's like, yeah, but you need it open too. And so it's just like a whole conversation where people are like, well, Mystic Mine is super toxic. And I've heard another argument of people saying like Mine shuts off its own outs, but it really doesn't, where Imperial Order literally shut off its own outs because it gets rid of Cosmic and Twin past turn 1. You can still open Cosmic or Twin to go and deal with the Mystic Mine. Like, that's never going to change. And so it's something where I think that Mine is fine because it has enough outs for it. There's enough that are already in your sideboard. If you're not main decking the out, like, it's unfortunate, but in a format like this, you kind of have to realize, like Bear was saying, that you have to main deck like a copy of Duster, a copy of Cosmic, and that's just like the format that we're in right now. And then if you know that your opponent's on like the Demise of the Land, you have to figure out how to play around that. Like, there was a tournament that I won because I was playing and I realized my opponent was on Demise of the Land, so I turn 1 went ROM IP, and then on their turn went IP into access code and then pop both. And so it was just, they couldn't get me on like a special summon. And so these are things that we can do to be able to mitigate these other problems. I think Mine's fine for the game because it's another card that's just like the best tempo card we've ever received. And I think cards like that are really nice for the game. As Shadow Rabbit was saying too, is just using it as a form of a card that's going to get negated. I think that's also really nice because it's kind of forcing your opponent's hand to negate it. I think that there's a lot of reasons why it's good for the game. I understand when people are like, you know, hey, like if it's on the board for like 3 turns and you're playing against like a combo deck that can just draw one piece of combo and go crazy and kill you. Like, I get that logic too because it kind of sucks and like they kind of control the tempo of the game at that point. But like, you also have the same opportunity to use a card like that and shut them down too. And it's not saying that a card is healthy because there's outs for it. I think the card is healthy because of what it does. Because like, if you're playing on Scythe Lock, there's no doubt I'm citing a Mystic Mine because at that point I'm like, either I'm opening up my Mine or you're Scythe Locking me, or I draw some kind of hand trap to stop the Scythe Lock.
No, for sure. It's like Sir Emanon said, like, skill comes into account. People don't think about that. It's like, if I'm, for example, when I'm playing Striker, I always sweat, but because it's like, I know I have to deal with my own Mine, and I'm not sure what my opponent has, and it's like, people are like, they just hate on Mine, but they don't really take into account the fact that it's really skillful to like use it to the best of your abilities in a deck, I think. And also playing against it, like you said, you know, I have like legit the same story. I played against the person I know he was a Mine, and Normal the Prank Kid that was like 1500, and I just attacked. And they were like, you're not special summoning? And I was like, no, why would I do that? And they just lost because I just poked them with Lampsies like 100 times. And it's like, you need to think about those things, and you need to, yeah, like I said, I think skill plays into account when you're actually playing Mine, because you need to think about your opponent actually, like, they might have drawn that Cosmic Cyclone already, but they're waiting and they're amassing resources while holding that Cyclone. So you need to think about that, I think.
Yeah, and like, whenever you have Mine on the board too, you got to realize that like, you don't know, like, if your opponent's still playing the game with you, you can almost assume that there might be a Cosmic in their deck, and you have to figure out what you're going to do and when, because the amount that you're letting your opponent sculpt their hand while you're sitting under Mind, while you know they have a Cosmic coming, is kind of terrifying, because they can set up like the perfect amount of hand traps. They could set up the perfect combo where if you don't kill them that turn, like, they're probably going to turn around and kill you the follow-up turn. So that's where like, you also have to then hope to draw things like D-Barrier or what have you to at least survive that next turn that you were just going to lose anyway. And so it definitely is just one of those tempo cards you just got to respect, and you got to be able to set up your board around it.
Yeah, I think the better question would have been, is anti-spell the new Imperial Order? Because one of the things we were talking about was power creep the entire time. That was a big topic. A couple years ago, because anti-spell is considered a soft lock, because like, you can set your spells and then you can use them next turn. It's not like you're permanently locked out of them from the rest of the game until you get rid of anti-spell, right? But I think we've reached a point in the game where if a deck can buy that one singular turn where you can't use your spells, you lost. Like essentially, it's the same thing as Imperial Order at this point.
The
Yeah,
game is lost, yeah.
and he spell's kind of cracked.
Yeah.
Car's kind of insane.
I lost 2 rounds at Hartford strictly due to anti-spell game 3 against Sword Soul. I played 6 Sword Souls and I lost 2 of them. The other one was to Flunder, who drew Harpy's Featherstorm game 3 in round 11.
Oh,
That was rough.
Yeah, sounds like you needed an anti-spell.
Yeah, I know, right?
Well, I appreciate all of you for coming on today to the show. Are there any last second comments that you have? Any last thoughts about the entire conversation? Anything that really stood out to you?
Well, firstly, I want to thank you. I had a really good time being able to talk to you guys, and I appreciate you having me on. And overall, maybe the last thing I want to say is the fact that I just appreciate having these kinds of conversations. I think it's important for us as content creators to be able to bring that to the public, because I think that a lot of times Yu-Gi-Oh players are very much focused on only one thing. Like when we talked about, you know, people not citing Nibiru because a thing is going to happen. Like I think it's important to bring those conversations to just say that you can do whatever you want. Like you can be creative with how you deck build, and you need to take a couple things into account. And yeah, I think that's really important. And yeah, like I said, I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I want to extend kind of similar sentiments. Thanks for inviting us. It was a lot of fun to kind of hang out and just kind of talk about things. And kind of on a sort of similar note, I do think it's important to discuss sort of controversial-ish topics, both in terms of like gameplay and like deck building philosophies, because I see a lot of people on especially like internet spaces, like comment sections or whatever, where people get really, really toxic about these kinds of things. When in reality, like we should be talking about things in terms of like with the goal in mind of improving like as a community, right? Like the better we get as like, you know, at the game, the better it is for the game, because like people are able to kind of improve and own their skills and be able to like, you know, kind of share things and discuss things in a more productive mindset. I think that's something the OCG does pretty well, because I actually had an experience where a couple of years ago I went to visit family in Malaysia and actually played a couple of locals over there while I was there. And you know, a lot of OCG players are like really willing and open to discussing things that maybe they even disagree upon. Like we had some disagreements here today in terms of like hand traps versus equalizers, for example. But it's totally fine because like we can be respectful of like our opinions and like just move forward and try and like learn something from each other. And I think that kind of thing is very important, rather than just like, you know, bashing people for having an opinion about like Mystic Mind or whatever. I think like that kind of thing is very unproductive, whereas having these kinds of discussions, obviously like not everyone's going to be able to sit down and have these sorts of discussions all the time, but I don't know, maybe like if you're chatting at your locals with like a friend or like other people about certain things, like it's always good to keep an open mind, just because it's overall healthier for the game, and I think that is something to kind of just I don't know, keep in mind.
Yeah, so like everyone else said, thank you for having me on. It was always like I love these type of discussions. It's always a fun time. I think the thing I'm most surprised about is a lot of our views just align with each other. I kind of expected more like, you know, back and forth, but we're all pretty much on the same page, which is kind of surprising.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad everyone's on the same page about Eternal format. It's great.
Oh yeah, that was the most important one.
Best format.
Best format, hands down. Best time. But yeah, you know, back at all of you, thank you all for being here, and it's a great time, honestly, being able to talk to so many different content creators on these topics, because as we're all saying too, there's a lot of different situations that we see online and what have you about the kind of bashfulness, quote unquote, that we start seeing as far as whenever you bring up a card like Mystic Mind, because it is controversial in the game. That is something that we talk a lot about, and I feel like we talked in the last episode even about how Mystic Mind is kind of our Max C, because if you look at the OCG, they have Max C, and like that's their card. Like it's just never gonna get banned. And I feel like it's almost the same thing with Mystic Mind. I feel like this card just hasn't gotten banned yet, and it probably won't for a while. But it's really interesting whenever you can have those types of conversations, because I feel like that's what everyone's thinking in the back of their head, but no one ever talks about it, just because of like what it is, and they're like afraid to be wrong. And like it's not necessarily being wrong, it's just putting your opinion out there and really being able to get a creative discussion going. So that's why I appreciate all of you for being here and being able to have that conversation.
Yeah, I think as long as like you can reasonably express like why you think the way you think, rather than just like, you know, again, like attacking people for their opinions. I think just having like a reasonable discussion is always a good thing.
Also, the ability to admit that you're wrong. Like, if you're just straight up wrong, just say it because it's all good. You're just gonna improve. That's also something that people don't really do, and I think we should all work on.
True. That is true. There is a lot of situations where I've seen people defend their point. I will die on this hill. This is the opinion that I have. It's crazy, but we do see it.
Sure.
Well, thank you all, and we're all signing out. So everyone have a great day.
Peace.
Bye bye.